And a method of studying morphology of so-called Polish rhythms. The term may be misleading because, in fact, it doesn't refer to rhythms of Polish origin or of a local traditionally, but to a phenomenon which is typical of Polish music, but is also present in other musics as well. Therefore, I use the term Polish rhythms in quotation marks. The term stands for triple meter descendant rhythmic structures, that is, of decreasing condensation within a measure. They can be as simple as iambus and ionicus a minore, so-called mazurka formula, and as complex as in polonaise, or even more. Opposite to descendant rhythms are ascendant rhythms with increasing condensation. Descendant rhythms may and do appear in many repertoires. However, nowhere is their significance as striking as in Polish culture, in which such rhythms function as a crucial identity factor, a true symbol of Polishness. Polish national anthem is built almost exclusively of such rhythms. My interest in this problem started years ago when I was working on Polish folk dance tunes. Except for the very north and very south of Poland, descendant rhythms in triple meter are literally everywhere. Actually, Kirsten was the first one to mention this this morning when she quoted my article for the New Grove. Exactly, mazurka rhythm, descendant rhythms are everywhere in Poland. The collection of Polish folk music edited in the 19th century by Oskar Kolberg, who documented some 15,000 tunes in dozens of volumes, is the oldest evidence of this phenomenon. But what about the history? In Poland, the oldest traces of such rhythms, identified by music historians, can be found in the Jan of Lublin organ book of circa 1540. A bit later, in the second half of the 16th century, West European tablatures bring numerous examples of so-called Polish dances, known under the names Polnische Tanz, Chorea Polonica, Balletto Polacco, Danza Polacca, Dance Polonaise. The dance consisted of two parts based on the same melody, while the rhythm was transformed from duple to triple meter. Such a two-part structure was typical of the time, but the Polish principle of transformation of the fourtans into nachtans was considered special. In 1602, German composer Valentin Hausmann wrote, "Instrumentalists who are experienced and well-based in music will either follow the Polish custom in the nachtans, or will know how to do it in the usual German way without harming the melody." And that's the difference. On the base of numerous sources, we can define the Polish way as descendant and the German one as ascendant. And here's the example of the full two-part tune from the first half of the 17th century. Part 1 in 4/4 meter is transformed into triple meter in a Polish way. You can see that the rhythm in the beginning of each measure is diminished, squeezed. That's the Polish way. The most spectacular export of Polish rhythms took place to Sweden, where so-called Polish dance, Polska, significantly contributed to the creation of the local musical idiom until now. In the 18th century, this second part of double dance, in triple meter, developed into two independent dances, Polonaise and Mazurka, known everywhere, which in the 19th century became Polish national dances. Polish dances and Polish rhythms became an object of interest for Polish and Scandinavian music historians focused on historical aspect, as well as ethnomusicologists interested mostly in origins and morphology of these rhythmic structures. However, approaches applied in both subdisciplines of musicology were rather descriptive than strictly analytical. My research goal was to reconstruct the historical development of Polish rhythms for better understanding of the presently documented folk music in Poland, but also in Scandinavia. I wanted to be able to interpret relations between Polish and Scandinavian folk music, as well as relations between any of these local musics and historical music. So I needed this reconstruction, historical reconstruction. As for the data, I have selected nearly 800 musical pieces from the 16th century lute and organ tablatures, mostly German, but not only, 17th century codices, 18th century polonaises, 19th century mazurkas and polonaises by Polish composers, including Chopin, with a few examples from the early 20th century, as well as selected Polish folk dance tunes from the 19th, 20th century. All the material was taken from printed collections, edited by music historians, because being an ethnomusicologist, I didn't feel competent enough to transcribe and interpret historical sources. Being also a pure musicologist, poor in the sense of being bound to work alone, and pure in the sense of having just musicological background, I decided for a do-it-yourself solution which requires neither particular experience in computer-aided research nor any particular software, as it doesn't go beyond the functionalities offered by MS Office. So, it is a proposal for everybody who needs to solve a problem, but has not much more than this problem, a computer with basic software, and a bit of imagination. Step number 1 was to encode music from staff to alphanumeric notation. This was the most time-consuming part of the work, as I found no solution to automatize this stage. I retyped all the analyzed tunes using the following alphabet, and I may assure you I'm doing it really fast now. I mean, this encoding, with a possible extension of variants. There are many variants. The basic segmentation, and therefore the smallest portion of information, is the rhythmic organization of one beat. The meter is always regular, 3/4 or 3/8, so no problem with the meter, what you present. No problem with guessing what the meter is. It's always 3 something. Rhythmic groups extending over more than one beat were substituted by a combination of basic units. So you can see that using this basic alphabet you can write on the rhythm actually. So that's just the sequence of impulses, nothing more. Sequences of numbers replace the original rhythm notation, thus changing notes into a quasi-text. To characterize Polish rhythms, two main rhythmic parameters are crucial. Average rhythm condensation, that is the average number of impulses per beat, very easy to calculate, and descendentality, that is the difference between the rhythm condensation in the first and the last beat of a measure. Descendentality is what distinguishes Polish rhythms as such. Degree of condensation differentiates them internally. For this purpose, the encoded text was replaced by numbers indicating the number of impulses on each beat. Having these numbers, we can perform calculations at the level of the first grades of primary school, just subtracting and such things. Very easy. Using average bit condensation per tune, one can calculate average descendentality and average rhythm condensation for each tune. The two values can be used as coordinates placing given tune in a diagram. In this diagram, the red dots indicate coordinates of selected characteristic, typical or model formulae for Polish rhythms. Here, the same red dots are hardly visible because they are surrounded by many points identifying tunes from two 17th century collections. For each analyzed corpus, I built such diagrams with coordinates of every single piece of music. And now, having accumulated more tunes, more corpora on one diagram, one can see that the repertoires move in time around this chart in a consequent way. For example, this is the oldest collection, newer, and so on. So there is an apparent coincidence with time also. I will present the final conclusions at the very end of my presentation. This part of analysis gave a general overview of changes in rhythmic parameters, these two rhythmic parameters of static material. The aim of the second stage of analysis was to give a detailed insight into the rhythmic structures in all examined repertoires. I wanted to be able not only to point at certain tendencies, like growing rhythm condensation, growing descendentality, but also to state how the rhythm changes from simple structures into complex figures and when it happens. I started with the classification of triple time rhythms that has been developed by Polish musicologist Ewa Dahlig-Turek in his work on the rhythm of Polish folk songs. Bielawski's system goes down from 6-syllable particles to the least condensed rhythms. Rhythm categories are equal, descendental, ascendental, and arched. I transformed his proposal in 2 ways. First, I turned it upside down to start from the least condensed rhythms. Second, I substitute notes with digits indicating the number of impulses per beat. However, this was developed for vocal music and was not enough for instrumental music, which I was studied. Therefore, I extended the table in introducing beats which not only have no impulse, 1 impulse, 2 impulses, but also 3 or more impulses. Here you can see the same, but written in traditional way with notes. These new symbols allow significant reduction of information, significant reduction of rhythmic structures to much fewer types. In this example, 5 different rhythms represent only 3 types. Now, about matrices including all the identified rhythmic types, there are no more, and all the analyzed tunes, there are many more, going to the first floor, maybe. Then, each column represents certain rhythmic type. Each row represents a tune. Tunes are put in chronological order, and the numbers indicate percentage of a given rhythm per of a given rhythm type in the tune. So one can follow in details the changes in rhythmic figures piece by piece, composer by composer, period by period. The tables were made in Excel. For visually more appealing results, what I like, I substituted the numbers with graphic symbols of different intensity. For each piece of music, each composer, each period, again, one can see where the tune is situated in the long chain of evolution of Polish rhythms. New material can be added at any moment without disturbing former results. So a very short overview of the results. In the 16th century, ascendental rhythms still prevailed, so not the Polish rhythm. Polish rhythms are only at the very beginning. They are just occasional. In the 17th century, descendentality is already strong and visible, but rhythms are not condensed. Now we skip to the 19th century, to the Chopin. In his mazurkas, descendental bars are dominating, but generally rhythms are largely dispersed. By the way, one can move between Chopin's opuses, which I actually did, and analyze in detail differences between sets of mazurkas from different periods of his creative output. So, these observations illustrate in detail general conclusions drawn in the first part of the analysis, which were following. At the early stage, in the 16th century, parameter of descendentality is crucial to distinguish Polish rhythms as such from others. Rhythms are mostly of the simplest type, yamb. Once descendentality is established as a distinguished feature, so the rhythms are on this part of the diagram, because here, everything here is ascendental, everything here is descendental. So once this happens, from the 17th century on, the average density of rhythm grows, clearly and consequently grows through centuries, through ionicusa minore, typical of the 17th century, till more condensed rhythms of the Polonaise in the 18th century. In the 19th century, rhythms of Polonaises become more fragmented and therefore not so consequently descendental. So the condensation grows while descendentality diminishes, decreases. Being aware of the weaknesses of my method, for example, I admit that Excel macros are not the most sophisticated solution. I nevertheless believe that the applied procedures make it possible to base the discussion on Polish rhythms on quantitative, objective data, if objectivity is possible, instead of descriptive, often emotional, often also subjective statements typical of many previous studies. This method has already helped verify some of the former hypotheses relating to the periodization of the old sources. Applied to folk music, the method shows its correspondence with certain historical stages, namely it points at the 17th and 18th century as the period when folk music rhythm seems to have been constituted. The method will now be applied to study morphology of at least 1,000 Swedish and Norwegian so-called Polish dances from the 18th and 20th century notebooks, to examine the relations to historical repertoire and Polish folk dances. Thank you.
Time for questions.
I find the observation interesting that, as you said, after 1600 you observe an increase of, let's say, of note density, if I can say it like that.
After 16,
I mean, that's how I interpreted that figure. Maybe you correct me.
Later, in the 17th, it increases.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you can comment on the possible influence of tempo in that development, because we have a very similar development in Turkish art music about a century before, which is related to a change in performance tempo. So if you look at the scores, you have an increased number of detail and notes just because the tempo was observed to decrease.
First,
I don't know, is there something like that?
First, it is difficult to judge upon the tempo because there are written sources with no indication of the tempo. But second, the remark about growing rhythm condensation referred to those descendental rhythms only. Generally, even in the 16th century, you have many tunes, for example, lute tablatures, so tunes written for lute with quite fragmented rhythm. So the condensation is not small; it is visible. But these descendental rhythms, these which are called Polish, they are of low condensation. So studying this phenomenon and only this phenomenon, I can see the very clear tendencies. First, the descendentality grows, and then condensation starts growing. Mm-hmm. But this was not a general remark about the rhythm condensation in music, European West music at all. So
yeah, okay. I just wondered if there are any sources which comment maybe also on tempo developments which somehow relate to these phenomena.
Not in the sources I used, because these were just transcriptions for
yeah, it would have been maybe historical sources or something like that. But
next question.
Hi. Have you found that the type of instrument that the music was originally developed for has a bearing on the note density? I've certainly found in other areas that changes in trends for different instruments will tend to change how the music is written.
I haven't made such a study, but generally, when it comes to the oldest sources from the 16th century, for example, this Jan of Lublin, I call it organ book. Actually, it is a kind of key. It is a source for key instrument, but the instruments were different of that period. So the source is not prescribed precisely to one type of instrument, but generally there is a difference between key instruments and string instruments like lute. Things become easier in the 18th century when most sources refer to violin music. And then in the 19th century to piano music, so you know really for which instrument it was prescribed. And definitely the piano music in the 19th century is most fragmented, most condensed with impulses.
Thank you.
Ewa, thank you for very interesting talk. My question is only about the encoding. I just wonder why did you choose this specific way, but not for instance, ASCII code, because in that case, the data would be accessible for
Very good question, perfect question. I was really considering this option, but maybe I was simply too lazy, because I was aware that the repertoire is huge, and to encode in ASCII, to encode pitch and duration, everything, it takes time. While here, the code, the alphabet, as I call it, is so simple that I really do it this way, that here I have the source, and here I have the keyboard, and I do it like that. I look here, and I type here, like a good typist. So it goes really fast. When you deal with thousands, it matters. Especially when I'm working in Swedish or Norwegian archives, and I don't have a lot of time, so I have, I don't know, something like 1 week to encode a lot of material, then I really must be fast, and yeah. Just very pragmatic reason. I started actually with, and I wrote a macro which converts from ASCII to this code. So for material which already has been encoded in ASCII, I can get it without.
And vice versa.
No, vice versa is not possible. Only from ASCII to this code, because the code is simpler. So from the simpler to the, I mean, unless you consider only a rhythm in ASCII, then yes, because my code is only for the rhythm.
We have one more question here.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I wondered why it happened, why descendentality appeared at this time quite suddenly. And second point, descendentality, it's not only descendentality but also syncopation, because of this ba-ba-ba, you always have this syncopation, this accented second beat, which is quite...
I wouldn't call it a syncopation.
A little bit. Yeah. Because pa-pa-pa is somehow, you get
ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. No, when you start the impulse exactly on the beat, it's not a syncopation. Syncopation is there's a movement between the beats, shift, or... But the beginnings are, well, they are still mysterious, but it's not probably so that it happens suddenly in the 16th century. There are very serious linguist theories that it has to do with the development of the Polish language, with the stress in the Polish language. The accentuation in the language. It was changing over centuries. It was first in the Middle Ages we have initial accent like Czechs have until now. So ta 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 ta. Now we say ta 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 ta. And there are theories combining both phenomena. So the changes in the language with the changes in the rhythm. Anyway, love of Polish people for such rhythms is incredible, and there are many examples of songs which were in the 19th century originally written in 4/4 meter, but they are commonly performed in 3/4 meter, using this kind of rhythm.
I think one final reply.
So do you think that they use it as for some political, identical reasons, that this is what makes the Polish Polish?
Absolutely. Oh yes. And I tell you, just very to end the story anecdote. But this is a true history. I'm not good in football and such things, but there was in Korea there was a world championship, and when the Polish team played, this was of course preceded by singing the anthem. And for singing the anthem, they invited a famous Polish pop singer, star. And instead of singing in a proper way, just in clear triple rhythm with precise descendant rhythms, she made it like an opera diva. It raised such a scandal in Poland. It was in any newspaper. How can you do something like that to the national anthem? So yeah, this shows that it has both political meaning. It is used for political reasons, these rhythms, but also it is somehow very emotionally deep in our souls, our hearts, yeah, in our brains maybe, yeah.
Okay, what a perfect anecdote to end this session with. Let's thank our speakers again and then go.